Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Scott from LA Not So Confidential. Right now, I am flying solo as Dr. Shiloh got a called away for some very important work. And what we were able to do is enlist the aid and support of the amazing Tammie Merheb-Chavez from our close friends and colleagues over at Hollyweird Paranormal. And Miss Tamala will be here shortly. Just as a heads up, I cut the crap out of my face in shaving in preparation because I wanted to try and look good for my folks. So if my face starts gushing blood during the episode, please bear with me. I'll try not to turn it into a bad episode of Dexter. So there we go. I hear the doorbell ringing. Hold on one second and let me grab Miss Tamala. Here she is.
Here we go.
It works.
Hello.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for making this happen at such short notice. I really appreciate it.
I do anything for you guys. You know it.
You're the
I'm
best.
always here.
Awesome. Awesome.
How's it going? I'm so excited to talk about this case.
I know. Well, see, that's what I was telling folks is that when we were putting together the outline for today's show, we were actually thinking about just talking about all of the current true crime stuff going on in the news right now. And then when I started looking at stuff, I was like, oh, there's this interview that had at the Idaho Statesman about the Vallow trial. And I was like, that seems to, I mean, you and I could probably sit and talk for hours just about that one case.
It's so crazy.
Yeah. So folks, everybody that's listening today and the folks that will be listening in the future, let me just get over some housekeeping and then Tammie and I are going to jump right in. As I was saying, Dr. Shiloh is otherwise engaged today in some emergency calls. And I am so very lucky to have as my guest and co-host today, the talented, brilliant, and charming Ms. Tammie Merheb-Chavez, who is the co-host of one of our favorite podcasts, Hollyweird Paranormal. Tammie is a New Orleans native who moved to LA in 2009. She is a costume designer for film, TV, and theater by day and a paranormal investigator by night. Give this woman her own show. I would watch the hell out of this as well as listen to it. Her introduction to the paranormal started at a very young age while living around the legends and lores that surround her home city, New Orleans, which we all know is just oozing with history and spirit.
Oh, yeah.
Her interest evolved more while working in a few haunted theaters and movie sets. And in 2017, she created a true crime and paranormal podcast, Hollyweird Paranormal Podcast, with her wonderful co-host, Bryce Mitchell-Williams. The podcast inspired Tammie to pursue paranormal investigations all over California and Louisiana. And she is currently working as Travel Channel's content creator and preparing for more investigations across the country. Have to say, you are so camera friendly, and I love whenever we get to see you being interviewed on these shows because you always look so amazing.
Skincare and lots of water.
Skincare and good lighting, right?
And summoning the spirits to make me look young, of course.
I wanted to very quickly give a shout out to our new Patreon members. At the associate level, we have Janae S., Mask the Philosopher, gotta love that name, Bestie K and Claire B. And at the doctoral level, Aaron H., Thalia Q., Amber S., and Matthew L. Thank you so much for your continued and ongoing support. We really appreciate it. And since I have Tammie here, we are really excited to talk about May 20th at Heritage Square Museum in Los Angeles. LA Not So Confidential is co-hosting a live show with Bryce and Tammie from Hollyweird Paranormal and LA Meekly. Very excited. It's going to be an absolute blast. And then we have CrimeCon UK in June on the 9th and the 10th. And we'll tell you more about what we're doing there in upcoming episodes. So Tammie, check in with me. How has your week been?
It's been crazy. Something's going on. Something with the moon, the ocean, I don't know. But it seems like everything's been going crazy along with this case that we're going to talk about pretty soon. And yeah, just gearing up for May 20th and also for another trip that I'll be making to Louisville, Kentucky. I'll be investigating the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. So
oh, wow.
There's so much going on, just like you guys have like so many things like in the works and we just got to keep busy, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it does feel like, I mean, in my day job, I deal with a lot of community crises, and, sometimes it's cyclical. And right now, there's just seems to be a lot going on. There's just
Mhm.
absolutely a lot going on. I thought that we were going to cover like a handful of things that are going on right now with true crime.
Yeah.
And the more I dove into this Lori Vallow case, because it is currently on trial, the proceedings are happening, there's just so much stuff that is going on. I just feel like we need to concentrate on this, and you were all in
Yeah.
on that, which is great, because
It is insane.
true
Like,
crime and zombies, like,
I yeah.
what? You can't have
I'm
a
like,
better
wait,
combination.
am I reading this correctly? Like zombies and she's in the court, like, like scribbling in her pad. I'm like, is she drawing zombies all of a sudden? Is that what her lawyer's making her do? Yeah, it's just this case is so interesting because there's so many things that are just popping out of the woodwork. And it's just clear as day, like what's going on and who's at fault and who is obviously guilty here.
I think that there's an element for me that is really challenging because it's so bugfuck crazy. I want to laugh. And yet at the foundation of it is this woman and her husband have just left an absolute trail of destruction, including the lives of children, which is just horrific. And while I might say that, we always want to say that in this country, you are innocent until proven otherwise, this one doesn't look good for her, because the prosecutors have certainly laid an absolute path of information, which has been explored a lot in the last few months, about how messed up this whole situation is. So doesn't look good for her. And but we're getting a lot of information about what was going on. So do you want to start us off with what you know and how you kind of got pulled into this?
Well, it's kind of reminded me of the Casey Anthony case. And I know there's a lot of differences, but here we have like a mother who was deemed the doomsday mother, who had two of her children missing. And she was like, wait, where? No, they're fine. And you have her family and friends wondering where they are. And she's lacking this concern, this general lack of concern for her kids. And
yeah,
the more we go into her life and her involvement with her new husband and what he was writing about and practicing, which was near-death experiences and extreme Mormonism. And here's this woman who, comes from California, this yoga pant-wearing mom who's all of a sudden turned into this extremist. And now her children are missing. But then it's not just the children, it's other people that she knows that she's connected to. Her ex-husband. I believe it's her new husband's. Was it his ex-wife that went missing as well and then ended up dead? It's just a trail of like bodies and blood all of a sudden in their hands. And we're just kind of sitting there like all fingers are kind of pointing to them. It's obvious. Why is it now, creating the circus all of a sudden? Well, we have to put them through the courts, and she's being very unruly in this court as of what we've seen this week. We had the graphic detail of the autopsies of her children that were found in her ex-husband's backyard. I mean, come on. It's like, it's a no-brainer right there. And now we have, the introduction of, well, there are zombies. Like, they're in a better place because they're zombies. Like, come on.
Yeah, I remember when this first came to my attention, it really didn't register for me until she and Chad Daybell were already in Hawaii in what ended up being their marriage and honeymoon. And then it exploded like, oh, there are children missing and nobody knows. Her family doesn't know where the kids are. Her friends don't know where the kids are. And like you said, she's showing just a remarkable lack of concern, despite the fact that she'll toss off, oh, they're with so-and-so, or they're here or there. And then people go, they're not there. Where are they? And it's just like Teflon. She just has no reaction whatsoever. And then it gets just creepier and creepier. We get more and more elements. And, here you have, at the risk of sounding critical about someone's, sort of affective presentation, Chad Daybell comes across as kind of a baby Huey, kind of a big, kind of doughy faced guy, hapless, like, has this, sort of non-threatening method of speech. And then we start seeing clips about what he talks about and what his belief system is. And Chad Daybell's belief system is completely off the charts, even compared to a lot of fundamentalists within the LDS church. I mean, he is really, really, really far to the extreme.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I think you pointed out something that was absolutely accurate, is Lori herself doesn't really fit the mold of what we would think of any of these. She's like a former pageant mom. I mean, like a pageant winner herself, and had a great reputation, although people would say, a little bit edgy, a little bit, sort of things have to be my way. But this is really sort of just explosively out of the box. And I can't help but think that maybe it's the worst combination of two people coming together and feeding off of each other and turning into this. I mean, it's just horrific. So just building on what you were saying, this week was week 2 of her trial for the murder of her children, JJ and Tylee. Her presentation was odd because it was across a spectrum. At points, she was chatty and smiling, and then freaking falls asleep, right?
Yeah.
And then starts to have a meltdown, and then asks permission via her representation to not be in court during the discussion of the remains of her children and the photos of her children, which is very, very odd in itself. I mean, you can understand why a mother would not want to see that. However, given that she was so, sort of callous previously, we wonder what the motivation for that is. And then Chad's attorney shows up in the audience, or in the participants of the trial, in sort of casual t-shirt and jeans.
Yeah.
Like, very, very strange. And then also now there's a little bit of a halt on the trial because one of the prosecutors had a death in their family. So I wanted to get to you an interview that you and I both kind of lapped up with spoons. It was so good. I mean, that was a tight interview, in the Idaho Statesman. And there were 2 journalists, Brian Clark and Scott McIntosh, and they interviewed Leah Satili, the author of When the Moon Turns the Blood. And that is a book about the killings and what is known so far. So what was your impression of some of the things that Leah was talking about? She really did a lot of research. She was in depth on this stuff.
She really was. I love that she came in with an unbiased and, making it very clear that she was learning about the practices of the LDS, the Latter-day Saints, and bringing in forth the Bundy case that occurred, I think, several years ago, where you had these right extremists, these Mormon extremists, that were pretty much calling war against federal officials. And what was so shocking about this case is that they were dismissed in the trial. Like, this whole thing was just completely dismissed. And another thing too is what she brought up in that interview is, now we're going to have to bring in, this topic of religion into this case, with eventually what we're going to see with Chad and Lori, because, they share the same views as the Bundy case. And, how extreme do we have to be with religion to, kind of like not oversee these things that are, occurring in the cracks, but obviously, what is occurring in front of us right now? It's these pieces of a puzzle that are not fitting.
Right. You can't. So one of the things, like, I want to just point out what you're really beautifully explicating right there, is that Leah is saying, we don't prosecute for religious beliefs, which is very clear. We have to, that's one of the foundations that our country is built on, is that we respect all religions. But, you can believe anything you want to, basically, but you can't act out in ways and use your religion to justify violating the rights of others or committing crimes. That just doesn't fly.
Exactly. So I think that was really great that she brought up that point, that aspect of, both cases in general. But other than that is, also dissecting, Lori's background too. Lori Vallow's background. And it starts with her father, who was actually an extremist. And I was like, whoa, that's true. That's
new information
right.
For me.
That was new. I was like, oh my God, that is like blink, blink, blink. That is crazy how her father was an extremist, but Lori never carried those traits up until now. So why now is the big question too, that Leo was bringing up. And that is something that I cannot wait for you to explain, like, how did that develop in her life? Like, what was her breaking point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that this was, I mean, in it, once again, I want to be careful about sort of commenting on any kind of diagnostic stuff for her personally, because that's outside my scope of practice. But, the way it's not outside the scope of my practice, but it's not, ethical to do that. But that being said, when we look at the behaviors, this is really problematic, but it does make, at least what you just talked about with her dad, gives us this extra aspect of, oh, this is an environment she grew up in. She grew up in a home that had a belief system that was very anti-government, that the government is trying to screw you, the government, that we shouldn't have to pay taxes, which is a very big, strong belief system among several groups like sovereign citizens or people that tend to live sort of in, these even rural Western areas. But she didn't grow up in a rural Western area. She grew up in Orange County, right?
Yeah, she was an OC pageant woman, yoga pant wearing mom, and she has this beautiful $1 million smile. She comes from a good background, and she is just a mom living in the West Coast, and all of a sudden through these ecosystems she ends up in the Midwest and ends up in kind of, I mean, in the arms of Chad Daybell. So it's like, how did this happen? And it's just this slow burn of her beliefs and what she's reading in his extreme writings, because Chad too is like this big author of these NDE or near-death experience books and Mormonism books, and it's just kind of the slow burn for her to get attracted to not only this belief system but for everything that he's saying. And then we see things kind of like fall apart after their union is set.
One of the things I think that certainly, to use a metaphor of making the ground fertile for her to engage with Chad in this way, was another sort of integral part of a belief system that was instilled by her dad, which is called the white horse prophecy.
Yes.
And that's been historically within the more extreme ends of the Mormon church, which is basically saying, and it's been there's a lot of division within the Mormon church about this. Like, most of the Mormons will say this was never part of canon. It's not part of our religion, but somehow it got integrated, like many things do, into various denominations and religions. Like that doesn't have anything to do with the Bible, but somehow it gets integrated. And the white horse prophecy basically is saying that at some point, the government will, the US government will descend, society will descend to a place that is disorganized and almost apocalyptic, and the Constitution will be hanging by a thread. And that's when the Mormon church is supposed to step forward. The 144,000 that are meant to get into heaven, those are going to be the ones that actually sort of save the world. And so there's been that back and forth debate about that. But you think about that, like, oh, if this is what you were brought up with, you're brought up with, you're most likely one of the chosen ones, and you hold a lot of weight with that. That's going to make you a lot more susceptible to listening to some of the wackadoodle stuff that Chad Daybell was promoting. And it sounds like at first he was like writing a lot of fiction that was just sort of what if type books or alternate history, near-death experiences, like you said. But then the line between his fictional presentation and what he believed as truth got really, really blurry. And even, I think I saw some clips in another show that I was watching where he's at one of these big conventions. I mean, Leah talks about that, right? How she didn't know that there was basically this entire subculture of books and recordings and podcasts and big conventions where they were basically plotting for the end of the world. And, you better prep for it because it's coming. That's amazing.
If we have conventions for flat earthers, then we can have conventions for everything else.
Very good point.
And everything.
Very good point.
I mean, like she said too in the interview, like she gets lost. Lori gets lost in this ecosystem of talks, podcasts, and books, mainly by Chad. And then she ends up in one of these big events, this big, convention of people who really believe and kind of amp up this rhetoric. So I could see where, it starts to get really blurry there for her. And she just loses sight of everything else and is so hyper fixated on this one thing.
So one of the things, did you get a chance to watch Sins of the Mother or Sins of Our Mother?
Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still pretty aghast at some of the information that came out from that, and I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone's religious beliefs, but I found it fascinating as they were interviewing all these people from her past. There were the podcast host that she was on with. There was another friend of hers who was very conservative, very LDS, fringe belief system, very well put together individual who is basically saying, yeah, we believe this, and this, but she went off the deep end. And I was going, honey, you're already off the deep end for most of the world. I mean, that was fascinating. And then there was another woman who, very interesting, she kind of presented herself as someone who has psychic abilities and the ability to prophesy. And even she was saying, oh, Lori, she's completely off the deep end.
Yeah.
Like,
that
wow,
is something
when the
that
people
I noticed
off the
too.
deep end are,
that's exactly what I noticed too. It's like they're like, whoa, like we have our beliefs, but she went a little too far. She went really into the deep end, into the black abyss, and we saw the repercussions of that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's pretty interesting too. Like there's a supernatural element because they talk about these prophecies, this sight, and Chad with his near-death experiences, which I'm sure there's a lot of proof about NDEs and OBEs, out-of-body experiences, and near-death experiences.
And some legit scientific studies of it as well. Yes.
These are very, by the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research. You can go and dig through their files. There's files that date back to the late, I want to say 1700s, early 1800s of near-death and out-of-body experiences. So I'm sure like Chad has this arsenal, like, no, see, Lori, I have all this proof. There's proof right here. And she's like, yes, feed me more. And I think that's where she just kind of got lost, right there.
Yeah, when you're not required to think critically, then there are no boundaries. And I can't help but wonder if, in the number of relationships that Lori has had, I think that as we move forward as a society, we need to probably reimagine what we consider to be even our understanding of heteronormative relationships. And we need to look at new norms that are much more expansive about what relationships can be and what they're supposed to be, as opposed to sort of old school, one man, one woman. But in Lori's case, she had a number of relationships, like it seems to be she was a serial monogamist, if I'm not mistaken.
I was just thinking right now, like, not just a serial monogamist, she just didn't have a connection with a lot of even her children.
I mean, it seems like she went through the motions a lot. Like she went through the motions of being a wife, of being a mom. And then, I think that, when, like I was saying earlier, when two individuals with a certain constellation of behaviors and beliefs and wiring come together, it's like gasoline on a fire. And that seems to be in this sort of milieu, maybe why she left those other relationships. It's like, I need to get my needs met. I need to get my validation, and you're not giving it to me in the way that I need it. So I'm going to go find somebody else. And she seems like she was pretty successful in doing that. And then with Chad, here's somebody that says, not only are you new and special, but hey, I have special abilities too. I can tell you who has already signed a contract with the dark or the light, which is the whole other like sort of supernatural religiosity aspect to this, that Chad Daybell was the one person who was able to tell who was of God, who was of Satan, and who had become one of these zombies, which is just bizarre. I mean, it's really, really a whole belief system that's just out of whole cloth in his head.
Another thing too that you brought up with Chad and his beliefs and this, what he was spewing to Lori too, Leah also brought up in the interview, is that Lori saw a lot of her father in Chad and the father's beliefs and his speeches in Chad. Like everything that he would say was just like kind of like this familiarity that she had to her father, which she found very interesting. And I was like, oh my God, that's a crazy connection right there.
Daddy issues.
I mean, yeah. This is beyond.
Yeah, this goes beyond daddy issues, but yikes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I really want to read that book because I would like to learn more about her relationship with her father. That's the thing I want to hear more about too. And, how them two like got along and what was it like living, in that past time of her life with her
Yeah.
dad.
I like, again, I don't want to place a diagnosis on anybody that I haven't evaluated, and I certainly want to be careful about that here. But one of the hallmarks of narcissism that's fascinating to me is just how people can turn off. Like, okay, you've been a siphon for me. I've been pulling energy off you for years and years and years. You're not meeting my need anymore, so I don't have any need for you. So I'm just gonna turn it off. And it seems like that is reminiscent of some of the behaviors that she's been presenting and had to do with her children. And even in Sins of the Mother, and I know that the son, who is very charismatic and speaks well in the documentary, I understand that he has some life challenges of his own right now, which are pretty significant.
Yeah.
He comes across as pretty authentic, and you can see the frustration in him, like, Mom, we're right here. How can you not, he's just begging for her to actually be human and compassionate again, and she just can't flip that switch back on.
She can't. But you know that there's a loose screw in there, especially when they talk about her brother. And the brother is another one that I'm like, no, that blood got into her system too. She just pulls it off very well with a pageant smile.
I love that you said with a smile. I think it's, this is another one of those examples that if she had been a less attractive individual or of any other demographic, this would have gone very differently and a lot quicker. Like, it just would have been discovered. It seems like a lot of doors and a lot of leeway has been given to her because she had poise and was, conventionally attractive. And that opens a lot of doors, right?
I mean, look at a huge example in Sins of the Mother, that cringe of the officers interview with her after the death of her. I think it was like, I can't remember, I have to go way back in my notes, but I think it was like the first incident with her ex-husband, or it was like the death of her ex-husband.
And is the daughter in the room with her?
She was like, come on, guys. I think so. I believe so. I could be wrong. It's been a couple of months since I've seen it, but I'll never forget that footage. Like, she was just like, come on, like, do you think, like, she's smiling, and they're like, gee, I don't know. You could tell, like, they're just being totally manipulated by her with a smile. And she's just looking very charming, kind of like, it's like this Ted Bundy element that she has to her.
Yeah, she's quite confident, especially I think that first one when there's the body cam footage, especially. She seems like she's really snowing the officers, whereas later when she's brought in for the interview by the detectives at the police station, they don't seem to be falling for it as much. It's interesting, they seem to be taken aback by the fact that she's so at ease with what's going down. It's like, your husband is dead, like, and she's just showing nothing. Even if you were they're, by this point, they're in a contentious phase of their relationship, which is clearly ending. It just seems like a really off, even if we didn't know contextually about what was going on with this case, as you're watching that on Sins of the Mother, you're like, oh, this is really, really uncomfortable. Yeah.
That's one of the moods I definitely had while watching it, is the sense of being very uncomfortable, anxiety ridden, and kind of like dumbfounded too, just completely dumbfounded with the way that it was going. And there were all these like kind of like little breadcrumbs of what was to come. Could it have been prevented? Could it have been, stopped? We don't know. But like everybody else was saying, she was already going deeper and deeper into this abyss, and possibly committed something that, was just completely unexpected.
Yeah, I think the thing that there's a lot that's really jarring about this case and this scenario. One of the things that still leaves me flabbergasted is that Lori goes out of her way to take custody of this young boy as her own child. and he has special needs.
Yes.
And she, there's something there that reminds us of compassion and like of doing the right thing. But then how do you switch all those years later to be so callous and sort of give credence and validation to, well, he signed a pact with Satan before he was born, so he's of the dark, and now he's become a zombie. And suddenly his behaviors, which are normative for someone with special needs, are now being framed and perceived by her as being of the devil. Like, that seems like a really jarring switch for this kid that you loved. But then you think, well, was that an act? Were you just doing that so that you looked better to people?
That's exactly what I was thinking. And not only just an act, but she had people to help her with this act. I believe in the documentary too, like, didn't she leave that boy with her parents for a very long time, or they were left with these other legal guardians? And it was like, oh, they could stay with him, and I'm going to do my thing. And maybe when I come back, he'll be a different person.
Oh, so she was coming and going. I didn't, maybe it's because it's been a while since I watched it as well. I didn't pick up on
I remember
that.
she left the boy with, I can't remember. I'm so sorry, guys. I believe they were like her aunt or uncle, or maybe her parents. And they fell in love with the boy. The boy was so sweet and so kind, and they wanted to keep him. And it was like this back and forth thing with her. And then she finally came back and collected him, and that was it. Like, they begged to keep him, and she was like, no, I'm going to take him, and we're going to figure this thing out with him. I'm going to try to get the devil out of him, in other words. And that is an interesting thing that you brought up too. It's like, that's something that I was talking to my husband about. There are all these cases nowadays with extreme Christianity too, of these children being killed at the hands of these leaders who are claiming that they need an exorcism because, they're going through a hissy fit. They are going through the selfish phase, and it's the demon, it's the devil in them. And there's one quite recently that happened here in California, actually here in Los Angeles, where this poor boy was suffocated and shook to death because his mom believed that, she, was, being possessed by a demon. So
Okay.
it's something that is not just her that this happens, but it's other cases too, where it's really interesting to see like how extreme religion can go in terms of, people's beliefs and what they feel like they could do in order to save the ones that they love.
I love that you're framing it like that. It takes me back to a part of Leah Satili's interview. And by the way, folks, I've got this queued up on my Kindle to read next, but I'm going to also put in the show notes and a link in today to the Idaho Statesman. It's about a 35-minute interview. It's really, really great. She has some great insight into this. And I want to build on what Tammie was just saying, because Leah talks about sort of the exponential growth of extremism within the Western US in the more rural areas, or certainly the more conservative states. And then how that was also absolutely exponentially magnified during the pandemic, because the pandemic was filtered through this belief system in those communities that the government was plotting to take something away from you. They're taking away your freedom. They're making you wear a mask. They're trying to get you to wear a shot. They're trying to get you to take a shot that has other belief systems built around it, that it was a chip or whatever. So again, it was some of these belief systems are pretty fertile ground already for believing that your rights are being impinged upon. And Leah also has written a book about the Bundys, the Clive and Bundy, and their occupation of the national park several years ago prior to the pandemic. And I love that she's such a great writer, that she is able to embed herself and create relationships with these people and get them to really talk about their beliefs, their belief system, because clearly there's a very wide margin of how people are treated in the US. We have Native American protesters at the pipeline that were treated horribly by federal agents, and yet the Bundys and all of their supporters were just allowed to take over this building on this federal building. But even Clive and Bundy, in an interview, she says, if I had gone to him and talked about zombies, he would have looked at me like I was crazy. So again, they're saying that here is that Lori Vallow's belief and Chad Daybell's belief systems are really, really far on the extreme, but they were able to flourish, especially once she got out of Southern California and continued her affair with Daybell. And he's doing the circuit of tours all in that area within what you use, that great term, that ecosystem of harsh and extreme religious beliefs. Very fascinating stuff. I wanted to say, let's see, yeah, she goes, regarding the zombies, you could take that and put it in front of Clive and Bundy and he would say that's crazy.
Yeah.
But there was also something that was very interesting that's pointed out about Chad in this whole process as he is trying to pull more and more people into his belief system, is that I do believe he's a true believer. I think that there's something about him. It's not like he's making this up to be a cult leader. I think he believes his own bullshit. He believes he has these abilities. He believes that he's seeing these things. He is 100% in, but he's also wary and manipulative enough to go slow about pulling people in with the term, no, he's not ready. No, she's not ready. So he's giving out the bits of the extreme information, the extreme belief system, just drop by drop to see if people are going to bite it. Like, oh, do they trust me enough? Did they believe me enough for me to take it to the next level to bring them in? I found that fascinating because it's very Machiavellian. It's a very dark triad, we say. Yeah.
It definitely is. He has a lot of ego when it comes to Chad Daybell. Like hearing him talk, especially in Sins of the Mother, is just, that's what I see, and that has been rubbed off on Lori. It's just this ego, and that's what I see in a lot of these cult like leaders. It brings me back to even like Manson too. It's just this ego and this way of, I know what I'm talking about and I know it's true and you're gonna follow me, you're gonna believe me, and here is the breadcrumbs that I'm gonna leave, take it or leave it.
Yeah, I think we've covered this. I know that you and Bryce have touched on this in various episodes that you have generated, that people are looking for something. People, not everyone. I mean, if you have a strong sense of self or a sense of self that is searching like, I need to find out more about myself, about my purpose, about my meaning, and you go about it in a healthy way, that's a wonderful thing. But if you're just an open vessel with no critical thinking skills employed, then you're setting yourself up to be somebody that could fall for this. I think in Sins of the Mother, there was the woman that had been chosen to marry Lori's brother. And she seemed to be one of these people that was just sort of brought in and indoctrinated and believed it whole cloth because they told her, hey, if you're part of this, you're going to be special, right?
Yes.
So like what he's doing is he's making people feel like you're one of the 144,000. You're one of the ones that's going to get to go to heaven. We're going to be the ones that save everybody. We're going to be heroes. So that seems to be along the lines of cult leaders and sort of using your own ego to draw others in. It's a great fishing technique, it sounds like.
Exactly. And that is a technique where I think that's what they're trying to figure out in the courts right now. Is Lori now using that technique? Did she pull, hate to say this, did she pull a Charles Manson? Where did she lead Chad or somebody else to kill Ty and to kill her little, to kill JJ? And, that is something that we're trying to figure out. Like, did she lead people to do this for her? Which I believe it in my mind, I believe she had... She definitely has blood on her hands. Whether she did it or not, or she led people to do it for her, is one of those two things that I'm definitely going to put my money on.
Or if she stood by and just let it happen.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many possibilities, but then, when we talk about sort of family dynamics and the roles that people play in these complex mechanisms that families can sometimes be, her brother just seems like someone that was desperate for identity. He had a strong, probably overbearing dad. Here's Lori, who's sort of the golden child pageant winner with the, 1,000-watt smile. And he seems to be someone that's just sort of struggling. So he becomes, I think even there's one point in the documentary where he says, I think they're setting me up for the fall.
Yeah.
So he realizes there at the end, I've been doing their dirty work. But then I guess I don't know if we'll ever know who was the one that finally said, hey, you have to take care of JJ and Tylee for us.
Mm-hmm.
What's just so very, very sad.
Yeah, it's once again like who's using who, and I think he pretty much cracked the case right there. He almost did. So it's, yeah, I mean, like I said in the very beginning, this case has so many twists and turns. It's no wonder why we're so engulfed in it and so invested in it, because Lord knows what else is going to come up.
Yeah.
Even next week.
Yeah, it seems like it's just going to be continuing to reveal things and other people coming forward. I would love to see some of these hardcore extremist belief peers of hers being brought into the courtroom for their testimony. Yes. I don't know if that would happen, but boy, wouldn't that be fascinating? I
would love for that to happen. I would love to see that happen. So if they could, that would be smart if they could do that. I don't know if they would. I don't know if that would be against someone else's beliefs, but maybe they should be asking some of those people from that interview or the documentary Sins of the Mother to come in and do so. But that would be very interesting if they were to bring some of those people in.
I keep coming back also to this concept of zombies. You know, zombies is zombie is such a really a relative term, or a recent, not necessarily relative, but a recent term. It wasn't really until, Night of the Walking Dead was a cult film. It was seminal for its moment. There were a couple of other zombie movies. It really wasn't, though, until Walking Dead that it really becomes part of the common vernacular, even though within the Walking Dead universe, they don't refer to the creatures as zombies. They, each faction has a different name for what those are. But for Chad to come up with this as part of his sort of belief system, is that they signed a contract with Satan before they were born, before they came into this life, and at some point they die, but they continue walking around. And I think another part of his belief was that the last part of you dies and then another person comes in, or another demonic entity, but then they have the most common name. Like one of the women, he goes, oh yeah, so-and-so has died and now Agnes is in her body. I'm like, a demon named Agnes or a zombie?
Agnes, really?
It's like the most common name, like yes. Very, very surprising.
Charisse.
Really?
Think of another one.
The demon Bob has presented.
Bob and Tanya. So it's what's really interesting about, the George Romero version of his, what is it, A Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
In one of his interviews, my whole question when I saw these movies is like, what is the metaphor for the zombies? Like, what are we okay, they come back to life from the dead and they have this hunger for flesh and blood or brains. But what is the metaphor for that? And I'll never forget an interview that he did for Living Dead it's about zombies being the metaphor of an old world consuming the new. They are consuming this new world, and this world is being, taken over by them now. And it's how this old society is now, this old society is trying to consume the new society as we're watching this unfold on screen, which I found very interesting.
I think that's fascinating. So that would, whether or not that was conscious for Chad, it certainly fits like the idea of, hey, I'm trying to move forward with our, I'm trying to save the world. I'm trying to save the country. I'm trying to, I think at one point somebody really had to try and chastise him because he thought of himself as Jesus, or he thought of himself as the second coming. So yeah, the old ways, the old demonic system is trying to take down, him thinking of himself as this, this savior. Very interesting too, because Chad, like I was saying before, had that sort of sort of big baby Huey sort of presentation, but you see all these pictures of him from his missionary days, and he was like this sort of all-American kid with big eyes and a big smile, and everybody sort of like talked about how caring and compassionate he was. And now that we've moved all this far forward, you think, there may be something there that he experiences the world differently. Perhaps he's wired to hear, see, feel, experience the world in an altered way from the majority of the population. But you hit on something that was really important, which is how big his ego is. and how big Lori's ego is. So the two of them coming together, it's like, you know, planetary collisions in a way. I think that this integrating the zombie thing just seems like, I wonder if this was just a convenient metaphor for him, or an image, or maybe he wasn't particularly creative, but on an unconscious level, maybe that's what he thought, is like, the zombies are coming for me, and I've got to save the world from them.
This new world is happening, and we cannot allow it to happen, with all of these, you know, ideas and beliefs, these new systems coming about that are against our beliefs and our systems. You know, when you think of Chad and his background, like, I'm looking at him right now, like, you could tell, like, he was raised in the cornfields, you know, and that is such a sheltered life, especially growing up in the Midwest. You're not so accustomed to seeing like this life outside of it, and you're just like living in this little bubble. And I trust me, I visited the Midwest, and I'm like, wow, like, people were looking at me like, oh, you got red hair? I'm like, yeah, I'm not Satan. So it's a lot of, like, you know, the outside is so new to them, to some of those parts. So I'm wondering if that is something too that he had, you know, developed and had grown up with. Like,
yeah, I think you're hitting on something. I think that's it's jarring, because I think in 2023, here we are, we think that, I mean, you and I live in a large metropolitan area, and we think that, okay, look, there's social media, television, everything is there for people to see. They shouldn't be so freaked out by the fact that you have magenta in your hair or red in your hair, and yet that you do get that reaction. So again, that concept of living in a bubble, living in an echo chamber, that comes along with either Western ideology in the West of the US, or it's extremist ideology or high religiosity, where you're in this echo chamber of like, everybody's out to get you. And it seems like that's kind of part of the regular vernacular right now, is everybody is just sort of, well, who's trying to take away what from me right now? I've got to be on guard. So maybe that's contributing to all the crazy that you and I were talking about at the top of the episode.
And I think it's safe to say, Scott, that, you know, crazy, you grew up in Bama, roll tide.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
You know, that's his own cult right there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I grew up with, like, I mean, football and pageants are their own thing. I mean, they are really, really their own thing. And it's hard to explain them. It's hard to explain belief systems to other people that just don't get how important they are to people, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But so it's interesting that whole pageant thing, tying that back to Lori, fascinating stuff. I think even during her pageant speech, there's one, she's really pretty cool and you know, charismatic and charming, but she makes a giveaway statement about, like, well, people think I'm crazy, you know, and her eyes get like that little bit of a crazy look to them. Like,
yeah, she's saying that with crazy eyes.
Yeah, exactly. She's got the crazy eyes. And here we are, like, all these years later, and something like this happens. I mean, again, the poor kids, and not just the kids, the other people. And you did mention also, I don't think that Chad Daybell's wife disappeared, but she did get sick and pass away very quickly.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Right.
She did pass away, but it was very sus. And I know that and I think her name too was Tammie. Is that correct? I'm trying to, And they also had to excavate her body as well and do an autopsy recently for this trial. And I mean, things were not adding up the way, like, they were even looking at like parts of the arm, especially from, I think it was JJ's body and her body. There were similarities, which was really interesting. So there were similarities from her autopsy that correlated with JJ's autopsy. And unfortunately, not to be too graphic, they couldn't even do a proper autopsy on Tybee because it was just barely anything of her that existed. So it was just pieces of her, unfortunately, which was really, really sad. It was very brutal. It was very, very horrible.
About you doing this to your own kids, and there are other cases of filicide or matricide where there's clear mental illness playing such a part, like Susan Smith or Andrea Yates, where Andrea Yates, poor thing, I mean, I please don't hate me for saying poor thing, but Andrea Yates really was a victim of another religious system. She was very, very ill.
Yes.
She'd been very ill for a long time. Her husband, Rusty, I mean, even to this day, I think that that guy got off scot-free for the deaths of his children when he was really held a lot of responsibility for not providing the care that his wife needed. But those feel very different from this case. They're like someone having a psychotic break and believing that they're going to protect their children from a terrible afterlife is very different from someone that just says, these kids are of the devil and I don't want to have anything to do with them anymore.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate you letting me vent with somebody else who's just as fascinated by this case. And it'll be very interesting to see what comes out. I think we're probably going to have to do a follow-up. We'll have to grab Shiloh and Bryce and let's do a round table when this finally gets adjudicated. And we've got Chad's hearings after this as well. So it'll be interesting.
Oh my gosh.
How the court system treats them differently.
Bracing myself for that right now. I mean, it's already a shit show already.
Right.
We're already in the second week. And I'm too very curious to see how he's going to be handled. But I think he's cooperating more than Lori. And from what I read too, he wants nothing to do with Lori. They haven't been in any sort of communication or any attempts of making communication with her, because I think from what I heard, I think even in the interview with Leah, like he's done. I think he's like, okay, I've seen the errors of my ways right now. And I think he's probably done with everything with her. And
it could be. Yeah, I'm actually really fascinated by that too. I'm wondering if it, like we were saying, these two big egos now realize that they can't do anything for each other. He can't get any help from her. She's only going to make him look worse, and vice versa.
Yeah, so now that they're separated. Yeah,
there's nothing for them to feed on. Lauren is listening. She goes, I just want to know what we find out about her mental health status. Agreed, Lauren. I think we're probably going to hear a lot about that in the coming weeks, especially if she's been so melodramatic here at the beginning.
That's what I was going to ask you earlier. And I was like, wait, I forgot. Do you think that they're like, respectfully, do you think that there could have been something brewing in her this whole time that was a slow burn and it just kind of led into this? Or, I mean, what is your opinion on that?
I would say that anybody with an extreme background and a set of beliefs, a particular set of wiring, there's just a whole matrix here in this particular situation. And I would say that I'm going to just reiterate the metaphor that I said before, is that I think that all that was needed was a match to set this wildfire off. And that's what Chad and her relationship probably was just
such a great metaphor.
They should not have been together. Lauren says you typically also can't contact your co-defendant. That's absolutely true. That's true. There shouldn't be any communication, but if they're guilty, I want them to face what their consequences should be. But hopefully anyone in a situation like this would be following the direction of your attorney, no matter what. If you're guilty, if you're innocent, whatever, you better be following the expert in this, and you're not the expert, your representation is. But yeah, again, these two people, who knows, maybe they just would have gone along their lives if they had not sort of met and become this couple. It makes me think about, what was the movie with Woody Harrelson and Julia?
Natural Born Killers.
Born Killers. Yeah, there's like this sort of this spark that comes together where eccentricities and mental illness and sociopathy sort of feed off each other, and it becomes this whole other thing that is violent and dangerous. And maybe that's what happened here. I guess we'll find out as it continues to develop.
Yeah, we just have to wait and see.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Tammie, you're the best. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're very welcome.
I really appreciate
it. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. It's such a pleasure. I love you guys so much.
And you guys, please come see us if you're here in LA on May 20th. It's May 20th, right? At the
Yes, it's May 20th. Yes. And there was a big question that was asked of me on social media. Is Heritage Square wheelchair accessible? Yes, it is. There is gravel road, so please research if your wheelchair model is capable of treading through gravel, which I think it should be okay. There's also grass as an alternative, but I know that there are a few ramps leading into the mansion and I believe into the church as well. So you should have some accessibility right there.
Yes, that is great. I'd also encourage, don't go just on what we're saying. Contact Heritage Square Museum directly.
Yes.
They are a wonderful organization, and I mean, they always pick up the phone. Every time I've had to talk with somebody, there's always somebody
They're
there.
always great.
But please come. We're going to be the theme is macabre mansions, and we're going to be covering with L.A. Meekley 3 different aspects of a wonderful and creepy, scary story. So join us.
Yes, guys. A haunted house tour is also included.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. It's so great.
Awesome. All right, everybody, have a great weekend and take care of yourselves, okay? Thanks, Tammie.
Bye, guys. You're very welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye.